Hello, everyone. Welcome to another CISO chat from ISAC Orange County chapter. My name is Victor Monga. I am the host for this program. Today, I have April Caesar with me. April, why don't we start with a quick introduction?
Thank you, Victor, for hosting me today and for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on cloud security with your audience. First, quick disclaimer, the views I'm sharing today are solely my own and do not represent my employer. I am today Assistant CISO at the University of California, Irvine. And for those who may be tuning in from outside our region, UCI was established in 1965 and currently serves over 36,000 students with a workforce of approximately 12,000 academic and administrative staff. We offer undergraduate, graduate, professional degrees, and also are a highly active research institution. It's great to be back at UCI. I actually earned my MBA there in 1999 and have since worked in a variety of sectors from financial services, healthcare, professional services, and real estate. But at the end of it, throughout that period, IT security and governance have always been areas that I've really gravitated towards.
Yeah, so today's topic is about cloud security, and it's relatively hot, I would say. At the same time, there are still a lot of confusions. I think one of the common questions being asked in this arena, someone who's considering cloud migration, what are the OPEX and CAPEX they need to consider? So, what are the things that they are using as a data center that they don't need to worry about it because it's already paid for in cloud? You literally pay for by minute. So why don't we start with that? If someone is starting their cloud journey, what are the OPEX, CAPEX they should consider?
Well, I think one of the biggest drivers for cloud adoption has been cost savings, especially in the earliest days. And I think that what people have really come to realize is that while there are certainly savings in capital expenditures, from the physical and building, you don't have the HVAC costs, you don't have some of the costs of the staff who are actually in the data center. The operating expenditures can end up going through the roof if not managed closely. And some of the things that people need to really keep in mind are kind of that the need to hire or upskill staff to serve in some new roles that didn't exist before. So things like cloud custodians, cloud architects, even cloud security experts, and cloud governance itself. If you think about just managing the cost in each of your environments, it's a growing part of any IT leader's workday. And cloud governance, I argue, could actually even be a dedicated role. We're now at a point where, on average, for people who are kind of on that cloud journey, a third of organizations, the larger organizations' total IT budget is now allocated to cloud computing. And it is that combination of the roles and every minute you talked about the workloads that are up there. So you really need to keep track of the services you're paying for. And most of the public cloud providers offer some automated tools to help prevent over provisioning. They can automatically stop instances that aren't being used. And you can even, if you're able to plan ahead, get some volume discounts to invest in reserve capacity. You can make upfront payments and save quite a bit on that. And, I think, again, back to automation, you want to be able to set up alerts for usage that's way out of bounds. In fact, you could have applications, a bug that can cause a spike in storage usage or CPU loading. It could add up to tens of thousands of dollars in a single day. And I'm sure those stories are well publicized. But in a nutshell, I just say accountability and governance do need to be in place to prevent surprises. Someone needs to be looking at the bill regularly and all the different environments, and even to know those environments exist. And then there's something that's more recent. When you look at the whole CapEx, OpEx mix, not every organization has the same needs from year to year based on like profitability, operating cash flow, interest rates, debt levels, all these different things. Depends, you want to have some sort of flexibility there. So although you can't capitalize public cloud contract costs once you're up there, during the implementation phase, the cost of making the move up there, some of those costs, if you track them appropriately, starting last year in 2020 for public entities and then starting 2021 for private, those can be, it's a new FASB standard. So there is some OPEX, CAPEX, some considerations there. But at the end, I would say cost aside, the non-financial benefits of the cloud, I think, have been far greater than expected. So you have the agility, the innovation, the whole remote workforce enablement, scalability, just to name a few. So I think the cost savings certainly were a draw initially, but even if it ends up costing roughly the same, the benefits, I believe, far outweigh the costs.
Yeah, one of my favorite feature when it comes to cloud, right? I don't need to think ahead. I don't need to plan everything because let's say I'm a startup or let's say I'm a small to mid-sized business. To think ahead, I can actually start and pay as I go. And I only need to foresee, so for let's say 3 months or 6 months, if I know these are the projects and I'm going to get revenue, then I can actually understand this is what I need to pay in cloud, this is what I'm going to get. So what's my net profit? Which is not that easy when it comes to
I was just agreeing.
one of the biggest advantage I can see where you can actually calculate your profit right then and there. But again, to flip side is then you really need to know where your inventory is. So cloud is easy. You can pay as you go. Anybody can set up as long as they have a credit card and account and internet, obviously. But at the same time, now you don't have the visibility. You don't have that comfort where you can go touch and feel and you can put your asset tags on the servers where you know exactly what my power cable and these all of the spent where you invested as your company money, where it is it exactly. So that accountability and importance of inventory, how does that play out in cloud, April?
I think keeping a current inventory is a challenge in general, whether it's hardware, software, even on-premise organizations. There is varying levels of success with inventory. Multi-cloud and cloud add a whole nother level. So you've got multiple applications, devices, databases, endpoints. Everything's kind of exponentially growing and more complex. And there was a survey I think Deloitte did last year, the year before, that found at least half of the medium to large companies say that the cloud is more complex than they expected. And that the actual complexity itself is the biggest risk to ROI. So, part of managing complexity, when you look at the whole inverse relationship between complexity and security, not having an inventory is just not an option. And at the same time, you can't really become paralyzed by the magnitude of the challenge. So I think when you look at inventory, people think of the traditional things, and a lot of these are captured automatically within the cloud platforms. But it's important, I think, to go even deeper, at least for that subset of your inventory that supports critical infrastructure or applications with regulated data or your crown jewels for that matter. And so really thinking about who understands each of these elements technically, who are the owners, what are the total costs to operate the entire kind of end-to-end ecosystem, and when do you want to start retiring some of these cloud assets? So looking at everything in the inventory using a risk-based lens and ensuring that the inventories of what matter to you most, to you, to your customers, and to the regulators are really current and managed. And to do that, you do need a process. And although reaching 100% accuracy is enough to drive anyone crazy, it needs to be kind of a discipline that's built in, and leveraging some of the great native tools, in Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and some of the cloud management platforms is a good way to start.
Yeah, so we talked about inventory, we talked about the OPEX and the CAPEX. Now, next favorite topic in cloud is usually the governance. So it's very touchy, and I think part of the reason is because our auditors, internal or external, they're not just ready. It's not lack of technology, it's a lack of training. I believe it's just lack of comfortability. They're not comfortable yet. They're not just sure exactly how to audit, how to apples to apples when it comes to cloud, because they're very used to of doing audits and the compliance reports for on-site, or let's call it on-prem data centers, how we used to call it. So How does governance of cloud works out, April? What exactly would be the gotchas or something that as a CISO you would have to consider?
Well, with governance, there was kind of two questions there. I'll start with governance and then I'll probably kind of move over a little bit to the secure benchmarking piece. But when you look at the importance of balancing governance with kind of innovation and agility, I think that's really where you need to start. So part of it is the idea of being able to explain why governance matters and some of the benefits versus having kind of that checkbox mentality. The what matters in governance, but the how I think matters even more. And this is even tougher for people who aren't in a heavily regulated or policy driven sector, because you can't point to that as the reason. It's because it's the right thing to do. So, having the right guardrails in place for whether that's security, privacy, especially privacy these days, and compliance, it's not negotiable. But if you help people understand what's expected and you make it as easy as possible to succeed, I think you're going to have a lot more buy-in, and you will be able to sustain it over the long term. So I kind of look at it as a few steps. Is first, with governance, is just knowing what you have to do, so the have to, and then what you should be doing. But most importantly, what people currently are doing, because that's where you're starting from. So if you're already aware of a situation with an existing cloud implementation that's non-compliant, just dealing with it quickly and transparently is critical, and treating it as a learning opportunity. Never ever being in a position where you aren't able to explain an incident and learn from it. That's not a good place to be. So looking at these is kind of a learning journey. I think a lot of governance initiatives are results of either a really bad audit or a bad situation like a data breach. And you don't want that to be you. It's better to start from a place where you're at a firm foundation and you're not reacting. I think another key piece that it's actually remarkably, it's a lot easier than it used to be, but if you can assess your environments against a cloud governance framework, you're in a really good place. And these governance frameworks have come a long way. There's the AWS well-architected framework, there's a Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and there's even tools where you can do self-assessments that kind of spit out a gap analysis and a bit of a report on how do you close those gaps. Because there's it can be really overwhelming. And I think the idea is not to be overwhelmed to the point of being paralyzed and not taking action. It's that third step, you take and you define, the RACI chart, like who's responsible, who's accountable, who do you consult, and who do you inform. Sounds really kind of traditional, but at the end of the day, as long as you have those clear lines in the sand and support each of the people in those roles so they know how to succeed, there's the operational governance, the security and compliance governance, and then there's just even the cost optimization. These are all pieces that these frameworks lay out quite clearly, but in cloud relevant language that you could even integrate into some of the more traditional on-premise worlds, which I think represents most of us living in that hybrid world. And it could double the effort, but if you do it right, you try to integrate it and build onto existing processes, but with that kind of cloud dimension, I think you can really be quite successful with governance.
Secure benchmarking and governance seems to be simple, and a lot of companies and organizations are doing their best. At the same time, it can get complicated pretty fast as well. So if you are in a hybrid model where you have something on-prem and cloud, and your auditors are supposed to know for how to audit your on-prem and cloud, that can be complicated, or it can be simplified, and it can really help organizations to get to their journey of either cloud migration or find that agility in cloud.
The favorite one, my favorite framework, well, there's several, but the Center for Internet Security, the CIS benchmarks, they're actually built in to some of these environments so that you can do automatic compliance checks in advance of the auditors coming. And you can assess your environments using some really cool tools, using the frameworks like NIST and things that we're all familiar with. And CIS is just one, but choosing the same framework for both the cloud and the on-prem environment, I think is ideal, because then you're speaking the same language. When you're working on a maturity model, you're looking at the same kind of metrics. And I think in a perfect world, your cloud and on-prem would be both at the highest level of maturity, but then there's also the reality of constrained resources and making those common sense kind of risk-based decisions.
Exactly, exactly. So we talked about the money part, OpEx and the CapEx. We talked about inventory. We talked about the CIS benchmarks. We talked about auditing and governance. Now, going with the same theme here, we want to talk about change management in cloud as well, because that's a very touchy subject. And sometimes organizations do struggle with that. So, what are your thoughts around change management in cloud?
I just think about, part of what makes working in technology so interesting over the long term, and for me, that's been several decades now. It's just that continuous need to kind of learn and adapt and adjust. And I think there's things that people felt they had all figured out, like change management. But then you just need to have that courage to question and adjust. When a new paradigm, like, so we have cloud plus agile, so you have the architecture plus just the working style and development, and the way people want to be more innovative and quicker, and goodbye waterfall. So some of the things that worked with change management before can still work in the cloud, but there is a need to look at things in a new way. So AWS actually released a great white paper that I highly recommend, called Change Management in the Cloud Best Practices. It's about 2 years old now, but I think it really captures the essence of change management and what are some ways that you can take some of your traditional ITIL practices and modernize them, so that not only change management it's accepted and embraced, but it doesn't grind to a screeching halt. So one of the first challenges is the volume of changes in a cloud model, especially when you're rapidly spinning up new instances and doing things. Far more people are making the changes, and just the very scale of it is just incredible. But does everything need to go through traditional change control? When you have those secure benchmarks and some really great automation in the pipeline, where you're looking at making sure that you have a good standard process, perhaps there's some things that used to go through change management that don't need to. And then there's other elements that are more relevant, such as like how configuration items are defined, looking at the images themselves and what those standards are. That might be a better place to start, really focusing. So defining more changes as standard type changes, which are the lower risk, and then making sure that the limited capacity of like the change control boards, change advisory boards are spent looking at the real, where the real risk is. And then finally, I think it's the whole concept of metrics. What does success look like? What are the KPIs? Measuring how many successful changes you have used to be, okay, great, very few fail changes. But is failure that bad? When you can roll things back so quickly, and also using a lot of automated triggers, maybe looking at the change control metrics and how to encourage kind of a little more confidence in making some changes within bounds and reason, and of course with full focus on security and compliance, but also keeping up with pace so that the change management process doesn't slow down the needs to innovate.
On-prem, I still remember when we used to actually have a crash cart, and every time there's a patch, there's an upgrade, or there's a hot fix, we would pretty much spend all night. And that used to be Friday evening or Saturday morning. And then we would really have to pretty much that servers come up or come back online so we can actually enjoy our weekend. Now, that lifecycle management in cloud is pretty different, because in cloud, if something new patches comes in for the infrastructure level or even the application level, the game is different. So how does lifecycle management in cloud works out as a CISO perspective? What are the things that you would have to worry about, or what are the things that keeps you awake in the night?
Well, when I think of lifecycle management, I'm going to take a slight diversion here and look a little bit, stepping away from kind of the public-private platform infrastructure as a service, switching now to the SaaS portfolio, lifecycle of a SaaS application.
Yeah.
It's, for those kind of familiar with Gartner hype cycles, the cloud management platforms are now showing up in kind of the plateau of productivity phase. And so using cloud management platforms can help with the traditional lifecycle management, but there's now a whole new area of cloud management platforms looking at SaaS. And so there was a survey by Cisco estimating that 75% of workloads will be SaaS only by the end of this year. And that's just crazy. There's an average of 288 unique SaaS applications in the typical large enterprise. And that's up just 30% now in a single year and up 50% for 2018. So it's just amazing. There was a survey by Blissfully, and they talked about people spending now an average of $4 million on SaaS per year for these large enterprises. But what is the most, I think, under appreciated cost and effort here is that for each of these apps, and especially when you're not using it's kind of federated identity and things, they need to have accounts provisioned, privileged managed, data dealt with. And these are being purchased mostly outside of the purview of IT. So as far as security, privacy, audit logging, alerts, you're really losing a lot of control and visibility. And so there's this whole concept throughout the life cycle of an application of the need to educate people who are now de facto system admins in every department of the organization. And I think SaaS lifecycle management, when you have a churn rate of where we are right now, it's over a 2-year period, over half of the applications can change over. And that some of these are going to be abandoned. Their owners will move on to other roles, other companies, and there's your data up there, unsecured, potentially forgotten in a cloud instance for a SaaS provider. And I think just the whole idea of SaaS governance throughout the life cycle, from negotiating at the beginning, we'll talk a little bit more about third-party risk, but making sure that these SaaS suppliers have the right security practices and that you're able contractually to kind of address the situation if there was a data breach and whose fault it is, that there is some sort of kind of indemnification, some sort of liability where it's placed in the right place. So I think, yeah.
I love it when you said, and there's something up there in the cloud, where do we go find it? And in my mind, I'm just being funny and thinking about it. If I would have to go find something in cloud, where do I go knock on someone's door? I don't even know exactly where is my data or something I really needed for my company. Where do I go and get it?
So are you talking a little bit about kind of the data ownership piece and where people are? Yeah, well, so here's the thing is, I think security is a shared responsibility, and that's just as true whether you're on premise or in the cloud. And so data owners, they need to be identified. They need to know their data owners and help them understand kind of what their responsibilities are. Often data owners do not understand the policies or regulatory requirements that impact the data in their domain. And they might not even know some of the places their data has ended up. So I think, one of the things as a system or data owner is you want to make sure that accountability and responsibility is clear, and that secure configuration, that they have an inventory of their software and data, and they've actually looked at it to see, is this highly sensitive, is this public information, and let's make sure that we're getting it protected accordingly and holding internal service providers, whether that's your IT team or your SaaS providers, kind of to task, looking at things like SOC 2 reports. Only 18% of the top 100 SaaS applications out there could you even get a SOC 2 report for. And that's one of those things when you have that third party confidence, at least from that point in time audit, to know that security practices are operating as designed. As an owner, that does give you some level of confidence. But I do think data owners just need to have that sense of accountability and be able to be kind of in close communication with people who can help them out.
Yeah, I know. I mean, everybody does a pretty good job at least the cloud vendors or even Cloud Security Alliance. They really trying to enable our community to understand the shared responsibility model that, hey, more control you want, the more responsibility is yours. The less control you want, or less ownership you want to keep it for your infrastructure, the less responsibility. By the end of the day, what you put into the cloud, the data, it is your responsibility no matter what you do.
Absolutely. And you can outsource all sorts of things, but that responsibility and accountability and liability still rests with you and your organization. And
Exactly.
you can say, well, this supplier was secure, but if you, as the data owner, grant super admin rights to everyone in your department, and you don't realize that things are being exfiltrated or that your credentials were compromised, it's your lack of kind of due care that is going to come into question there. And it's again, you can't point the finger always at the person at the SaaS company.
Rightly said. Yep. So now the next part I want to talk about, when someone doesn't have any cloud strategy just yet, and they have a vendor management office, or they have a vendor management process and practice. When it comes to third-party risk management in cloud, how does that play out? I mean, every company has to, one way or the other, do a B2B, business to business partnership, or they have to actually figure out a way to share some sort of data so they can keep growing. How does that work out, or what are the risks in when it comes to cloud for third-party risk management?
First, I want to share that, there's a lot of assumptions around IT taking care of all of this and making sure that the right third-party risk management processes are happening. And I think the most important thing is to have that partnership, particularly with procurement, but also with kind of your legal team, with the finance team, risk, privacy, and that all the cross-functional areas involved in the process have kind of shared goals and understand the importance of cyber risk reduction, because when that cohesion isn't there, it really can be frustrating to try to put in a good third-party risk program. There's the four phases when you look at the third-party risk, whether that's in the SaaS or platform or infrastructure as a service. It's the first thing is around that due diligence and selection. And so making sure that you take the time to really evaluate what you're signing off on, the terms and conditions, try to look at the contract for the long term and take that time. There can be these crazy deadlines, and at the end of the day, skipping over the due diligence process can really be very, very unfortunate. The second piece, again, is during the onboarding, and making sure that everyone's kind of aligned and aware at that stage. But when you go towards that monitoring piece, and I think I mentioned how many applications we're starting to see now, having some sort of third-party risk management automation or technology, I think is super helpful. There are solutions now that are scanning the environment constantly and alerting you to whether there's applications or vendors in your portfolio who have had an incident or a breach, so you can act immediately. I think we all would like to think that we'll be informed right away, and it might even say so in the contract, but things move really fast, and being able to be on top of that, I think, is really important. Looking at the importance of kind of mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes you're dealing with a third party, and all of a sudden that third party has been absorbed into another entity, and that changes the calculus again. And it's another opportunity to reevaluate whether it's still the right solution. And then there's the concept of offboarding and making sure that when you leave the vendor that you actually do have all your data and you know that it's been securely disposed of, that you don't lose any valuable kind of audit logs or history in that process. And again, those are some of the things you can look at during the due diligence phase and contracting to be sure that the third parties are there. And this is where we really want to have that partnership again with legal, procurement, other teams, because it's quite time consuming, and being able to manage expectations for businesses, units who want to buy it tomorrow, or if they've already bought it. So you kind of have to back into the whole process. But I think doing the right things upfront definitely pays off.
Absolutely. And one of the things I want to kind of highlight, I know we hear this all the time that someone left their S3 bucket permissions, and so the data was stolen out, or they had other instances exposed on internet. So having a right cloud strategy, it's very important. But to execute, as April said, you need to partner with business units like legal, compliance, vendor management, HR as well, so that you are well suited for that cloud strategy and cloud migration. So, April, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to absorb. At the end, are there any resources that we can recommend to our audience that they can at least start their learning and then go from there, whichever way they prefer from the cloud journey?
There's an incredible desire, I think, from everyone in this ecosystem to make cloud really successful for the clients. And so I think there's the vendors themselves. So I know that Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS and others have created some incredible frameworks, which I've mentioned earlier. Go to their websites. They have every year. It's just so much has grown and changed. So you just staying very current is critical. But organizations like ISACA, like Cloud Security Alliance, and like the Center for Internet Security they have the answers. And the answers are actually out there. But I believe that ultimately it's our ability to translate that knowledge into action is the only thing that's going to move the needle. And having an open mindset to keep learning and absorbing new information. All of our diverse experiences and paths and skills bring us to kind of to where we are. But at the end of the day, you just have to keep on incorporating that new information. You just can't go in there and especially as a security compliance professional, go in and assume that you have all the answers. There is something that you need to be kind of scanning that environment with every day. There's the Gartner hype curve. If you want to look at some of the new emerging cloud security trends and things that are on the horizon, and then those things that are proven. And Gartner has some incredible analysis of different products and making sure that you're asking peers as well what's really working, because you can have an amazing vendor presentation and get all excited about your product, then you talk to some of your peers and realize some of the shortcomings, and then you might learn some new things that you didn't even know existed. So leveraging your network, staying connected to groups like ISACA, taking advantage of the free and ample resources provided by these public cloud vendors, I think allows you to really build that strategy and succeed in the cloud.
Well, April, I'm sure attendees are enjoying this session so far, and they're going to have a lot to go research, and this was really insightful. So, on behalf of our Orange County Chapter Board, I really thank you for this time and sharing your insights with our audience.
Thank you, Victor. It was great being on your show today.